Playing with Myth, How Game Designers Should Model Representations of History Through Speculative Nonfictions. I changed it a little. I'm sorry that it's very wordy. Let's get into it. So our objectives are, we're going to discuss how speculative design, esoteric, and avant-garde frameworks help us consider new approaches to games. We're going to explain some historical concepts about myth, belief, playing, and then show an example of how that's embedded into the game logo design. And we'll talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means for a game to be nonfiction. I know that's strange for a conference that's about storytelling, but bear with me, and we'll explain. So I've had a really interesting career. I've gotten to do a lot of different things in games. I started out in retail at a mall in the Midwest and made my way to working at Rockstar Games on a number of titles, including 2 Grand Theft Autos, Red Dead Redemption, Max Payne 3, and L.A. Noire. I remember being in the office and hearing about this group of artists called Baby Castles who were creating DIY indie video game arcades at music venues around the city. This is back in 2009, 2010. So I went to some of their events and met the founders and started working with them. We were functioning kind of like an art collective and doing really interesting spatial games. We turned the Hayden Planetarium into a spaceship at the the American Museum of Natural History. This was like 10 years before the Las Vegas sphere was invented, 15 years. But certainly like a really amazing experience. We got to do a lot of other things, like we built a jungle inside of the Museum of Art and Design with Keita Takahashi, the creator of Katamari Damacy. And because we were in New York, we were getting a lot of press attention all the time. The video game media was focused in New York. And so after a couple of years, I was invited by Vice Media to cover games culture for Motherboard. And I started doing that by hosting a party where we had Doug Wilson create a version of Johann Sebastian Joust that was played against RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan performing live. In 2019, I started my game studio, Little Red, trying to do some new and novel things in games. I started Logos Divine in 2020, and the first edition was released in 2023. I'm getting ready to do a Kickstarter for the second edition, which is a tighter, more consumer-ready experience. So across my career, I've always struggled with the 2 Rogers. The philosopher Roger Caillois, who said, "Play is an occasion of pure waste, a waste of time, energy, ingenuity, skill, and often of money." And of course, Roger Ebert, who famously said, "No gamer now living will survive long enough to experience the medium as an art form." You can imagine that was pretty infuriating to the group of artists and developers that I was working with when Roger Ebert said those words in his blog. Because of my proximity to these various international groups of independent game designers, I have gotten to attend a lot of like eye-opening talks about game design and the purpose behind what we do. And so I'm going to talk about I'm going to highlight a couple of those talks, and not just game designers, but philosophers and design critics who've influenced me. First, I'm going to start off with Paolo Pederocchini. He leads Mall Industria. It's a game studio in Pittsburgh. He's originally from Milan, I believe. He uses games to critique systems that we must participate in from a leftist perspective. He said in his 2014 talk at Indiecade East, a new game aesthetic has to be explored, one that revels in problem making over problem solving, that celebrates paradoxes and ruptures, that doesn't eschew broken and dysfunctional systems, because the broken and dysfunctional systems governing our lives need to be unpacked and not idealized. That same year, I got to see David Kanega talk at the Indie Soapbox at GDC. And he gave this incredible talk called Music, Object, Substance, and Organism. David had worked on the game Proteus as a composer, and then went on to create Oikospiel, a dog opera. One of the big takeaways from that talk was what David said about approaching game design from a different perspective. We should be designing affordances, not rules. We should be designing materials and not games. So my work uses the form of games to make systemic bodies of information accessible through interactivity. I've surveyed the history of belief and spiritual practices to unite them as a material game object in the context of Logos Divine. So I looked at everything from ancient metaphysics to the tradition of Renaissance playing cards to Enlightenment Era initiation societies, esoteric tarot cartomancy that those Enlightenment societies formed, and repackaged it in the form of a modern consumer game. So how do we make games that aren't a waste of excess energy and time? Games can popularize nonfictions, being the first exposure that many of us have to the humanities. I was listening to Megan's talk yesterday and was reminded that my first game was Altered Beast, which I didn't know what a Japanese game development studio was. I didn't know what Greek mythology was. I didn't know what historical anachronisms were, but I was terrified of that the moment you turn into a werewolf. So I could only play it until you get that last power up, and then I would turn off the game and run upstairs. Our current way of making games is more modern fantasy for players than kind of an engendered world worth exploring. So entertainment is the priority. It's regarded as fiction by its creators, and so they have kind of a poetic license to do what they will. So that's game mechanics leading kind of historic settings. But at Little Red, we're working in reverse, and I'm trying to make meaning over mechanics to create nonfiction games. So turning valuable historical perspectives into game affordances themselves. So the story must be the player's experience and not the designer's intention. That's something I also have learned from other facets of design, from like user experience versus user interface. Games are ostensibly, especially video games, a user interface. So I also saw this talk by the design critic and science fiction writer Bruce Sterling. And he introduced me to a number of interesting facets. I think he was like college roommates with Warren Spector, who designed Deus Ex. But a computer can learn to play chess. It can learn to program a game of chess. It can learn to draw and sculpt chess pieces, but it can never learn to enjoy chess. We must remember purely human ways of play. That's not a quote from Bruce Sterling, but the top quote is at a talk he gave to Silicon Valley about technology and the way in which these systems of technology are distributed. So we're at this inflection point in history where pedagogy and the livelihoods of the creative class are being intertwined and severely disrupted by technology. Designers, artists, and musicians have been through this before, musicians especially, from Napster to streaming platforms. Their own livelihood is incredibly compartmentalized and filtered through ways of making money. I believe that games can be the medium and method which allow us to transmit systemic information in a new way. And so I'm making games that explore that. Sterling introduced me to Dunn and Raby, who are two designers who coined the conceptual framework called speculative design. And speculative design unsettles the present by using design as a myth, which articulates modern contradictions. So I think like a perfect example of this type of work that they make is this plush atomic bomb cloud. It's a children's toy that is hugged for comfort, and yet it's in the visage of the most existential threat of the 20th century. Logos Divine is started out as a speculative game object. It was something that was an art project for me, and something that I've since been retooling for a modern gaming audience. I had the chance to interview Anna Anthropy when we did a curation of her work in 2012, I think, as a part of Baby Castles. And Anna has championed the DIY ethic of creators, and especially the Twine engine as a kind of lowest barrier to entry for game development. And she talks about this a lot in her Rise of the Video Game Zinesters, which was an incredible book from 2012. In it, she says, smaller games with smaller budgets and smaller audiences have the luxury of being more experimental or bizarre or interesting than $12 million games that need to play it safe, as safely as possible to ensure a return on their investment. Logos Divine is a way for me to combine a number of interesting developments that have occurred over the history of playing cards. So it's part playing card deck, it's part tarot cartomancy or tarot reading, and it's part a codex of ancient wisdom. Instead of creating a series of fantastical creatures in like Pokemon or, like the Tobin spirit guide of Ghostbusters, I just used real ancient occult figures, and these are gods and goddesses from the syncretic mystery traditions of Roman antiquity. Because of this, I was able to graft an incredible wealth of historical information onto what's ostensibly a more beautiful version of traditional playing cards. So you can play Crazy Eights with it, you can play Solitaire, you can play Rummy, you can play comparative mythology, Go Fish. It's not one game, but rather like a system of games. One that has all like additional layers of gameplay that I have added. One thing that I found to be incredibly interesting about ancient games is the development of Mehen, which was an Egyptian board game from maybe the earliest dynasties of ancient Egypt. And it was this board game. There's one at the University of Chicago where you start from the outer rim with a goose's head, and you move to the center, and then it's kind of like you get knighted or kinged in like checkers. And then when you go, you have to go back outwards, and as you overcome the other players, you can steal their pieces. What is incredibly fascinating about that is that this is also like a mythological motif being kind of turned into a pageant through gameplay. So the meaning of Mehen is that he is this serpent figure that protects Ra every night as he journeys typewriter style through the Amduat and the afterlife. He gets in his bark, and he's protected by the spiraling serpent, and then the other gods help him defend against Apep, so that he can inevitably rise in the east again the next morning. I'm going to talk about Slavoj Žižek, a Slovenian philosopher. And Slavoj talks a bit about games, but his real love is movies. I really recommend you watch The Pervert's Guide to Ideology if you're interested in what he has to say. He was talking about the tragedy of what it means for us to not be able to say the truth. It doesn't awaken something within us. He uses the examples of like romantic comedies where like two characters are like sharing a like doing like a play, like a theatrical performance of some romantically entwined couple. Those are the things that allow them to have like experience the emotion that they are feeling towards one another, but it's entirely in this fictional dimension. So he says masks are never just masks. Even in games, we bring out something which we are not ready to confront in our so-called real life. And he goes on to talk about Jim Carrey's The Mask. He says he's completely free, but a nightmare comes out. He experiences the mask as a spectator in his own life, where he puts it on out of reluctancy. There's something liberating in games. Can you imagine how horrible life would be if you were just telling the truth all the time without experiencing your own hypocrisies? He also talks about game universes, specifically video games, and quantum mechanics. He said, let's say you're fighting in the streets of a small town in a game. You see a tree in the town, but you cannot see the tree. You cannot like walk around the tree. It's not a part of the game's programming. It's an incomplete model. Did God bother to create anything smaller than the atom? We must consider the superposition of events which when other options have failed to show us what has happened. Switching back to antiquity, there are tons of examples of symbolic motifs that kind of show what reality meant to the people living in that time. I think everybody knows Pythagoras for his triangles, but what they don't really know is that he was also like leading a cult that was devoted to like the meaning of numbers. What does it mean to be one, and why is two, and so on and so forth. A lot of this is embedded into other like later esoteric traditions, especially through like gematria. In antiquity, people were using their own symbolic semantic universes to describe phenomena that they were witnessing. You can see these two figures on the right are one standing on a globe. It's covered in zodiac symbols on its body, and it's intertwined by a serpent. These are cosmological motifs, probably from a Mithraic context. We're not really sure what the golden idol represents, but it was found in a Syrian mystery temple on the Janiculum, and this little idol is on display in the Diocletian baths in Rome, while the lion-headed Leontocephaline is at the entrance of the Vatican's library. And you can see there's a crab, a goat, a ram, and a man holding scales embedded on his body. These are the cardinal zodiac signs: Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn. So for Logos Divine, I created something I've called the Newman system. So these are grafted onto what is ostensibly the framework of a traditional playing card deck. So here you can see the aces of the deck. Each one is in a different color. The white ranks are what are the traditionally like black pip cards in a French deck, while the red ones are the hearts and diamonds. So spades and clubs represent fire and air, where hearts and diamonds represent water and earth. In the center of these cards, when they make this formation, are where I place the Newman symbols. So these symbols represent the elements, but there are additional Newman that aren't pictured here. I'll come back to them later. Historical context for playing card development over history is a really fascinating topic. We're not exactly sure where they, like the original playing cards came to be, but it's likely between the 9th and 11th century in China. Um, those cards eventually made their way to Mamluk Egypt, likely via the Persians, who also invented their own forms of playing cards. Those eventually made their way into Islamic Spain and Italy. It was in the 15th century in Milan that the first tarot deck was invented. It was 300 years after that when the first systemic approach to fortune telling for tarot cards was invented by a French author named Etelea. About that same time, a French Freemason published this anthology of work. His name's Anton Court de Geblon. He was a Huguenot preacher turned Freemason, and he had this. He had a friend who was a duke of Malay write this essay about how tarot comes from ancient Egypt, and it was this long lost book of ancient wisdom written by the ibis-headed god Thoth. This is all like 10 years before the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. So like we don't like. I think they were just looking at hieroglyphs and like creating a narrative that said like, oh, this form of storytelling of using cards for bettering yourself goes back to antiquity. But I think what that's pointing to is the kind of symbolic use of imagery across history. There's a group of occultists that came about 100 years after that called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. These were they were a schism of Freemasonry and similar Enlightenment era societies, operating largely in the UK and London. They embedded the tarot cards with systems of cosmological associations, from zodiac symbols to planets to Hebrew letters for each of the trumps. But tarot was already embedded with a kind of Renaissance era of imagery, which itself was a revival of Roman traditions. So the triumphal procession, which is a motif that the Holy Roman Empire revived, of Roman military displays and processions. There's also a lot of Christian virtues. You can look at like temperance, for instance, and see precedent in the work of Giotto. And then medieval social classes, whether that's, depending on which part of Europe you're in, it might be the Pope, it might be a Hierophant, it might be a priest, or these different motifs are kind of showcasing a world that the people of the Renaissance would have understood intrinsically. So among the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn's members were Arthur Waite, Aleister Crowley, and Austin Osman Spar. Waite created the Rider-Waite deck with Pamela Coleman Smith. It's the most famous tarot deck in the world. When you think of tarot, that's probably what you're thinking of. Aleister Crowley had a very different approach to tarot. He was creating his own religion, whereas Waite was kind of like a Christo hermeticist. I am embedding these cards with the same associations that the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was using, but extrapolating it to more facets of the cards. So by combining the cards in this fashion, you can see artwork that's combined in such a way that it highlights divine archetypes. So I have Jupiter here, which I think I saw at the Capitoline Museum. And that symbol is a hand holding a thunderbolt. It comes from medieval alchemy. It represents tin, presumably because when you shake tin, it sounds like thunder. So on the left, I have artworks that have that numen are representations of that kind of divine archetype. So I have Zeus Amun, which was the syncretic deity that combined Amun with Zeus, that Alexander the Great often depicted himself in the visage of. I have Marduk, who is the Babylonian storm god and head of the pantheon. And then I have some Cretan motifs of various ritual and aesthetic qualities found in Knossos. On the right, I have cards matched by rank instead. So these are the twos. And so while I'm using the Newman to explore archetypical imagery, I'm using the ranks to explore motif-based imagery. So the twos are serpent slayer motifs. So here you can see Hadad, the Canaanite storm god who battles his brother Yam, the sea. There is Cadmus and Ra and Michael from Revelations. All of these are very interesting motifs in that they often are fighting multi-headed serpents or dragons, a motif that has influenced media ever since. So here you can see all of the minor suits. This is the 52 cards with courts and with their Newman. They come across 4 different suits, all of which represent various elements of the classical model. By having both ranks and Newman, I'm able to overlap probabilities when it comes to trick-taking games, which is a great place to be for creating a new rendition of playing cards. Furthermore, it's in all of my playtesting and work, it's incredibly difficult to explain the arcana outside of a cartomancy environment. People understand what tarot cards are, but they don't understand that they were at one point a game. So I've kind of reintroduced them in a gaming vernacular in a way that might be unfamiliar to American audiences, but I think makes sense within the context of Logos Divine. So back to the Newman. This is a Roman theological concept going back to the antiquity, where the very Roman notion of divinity was kind of this animistic belief in that the god's power resided within these sacred implements, natural phenomena. So for Zeus, that might be the thunderbolt, and the power of storms resides in that. But the other gods their power is embedded within their technology as well. So if we look at the Austin Powers necklace to the right of the Earth, that's the symbol for Mars. It's a spear and shield. These are the implements that he gets from his mother, Juno. By the way, this is the way in which Augustus justified his worship and his divinity was like, oh, it's not me that you're worshiping, it's my Newman that you're venerating, and therefore it's okay. I'm not a divine king. It's a very tricky historical perspective, but one that I thought was worth turning into game mechanics. I also took concepts of astrology. I'm building a cosmological image here for you, while the ancients had a geocentric worldview up until Copernicus and Giordano Bruno. The immensity of the zodiac is that it's so remote from our solar system that it doesn't matter if you're on the sun or if you're in the Kuiper Belt. The constellations are roughly the same. That's how massive the universe is. Using these ancient forms of placing humanity within a world context, I thought it was a good way of reviving the kind of esoteric and gameplay aspects. And we can create ways of forming tricks that use these kind of accordances that you find in astrology. Another facet of antiquity is theological concerns. So, in a polytheistic, syncretic world, it's a very strange uprising that occurs when Christianity hits the scene. The Romans had this incredible system that was based on a lot of history, not just from within in their own concept of the noumen, but it was comparable to the other systems that other civilizations were using, and that was incredibly helpful as they were building a globalized society to have this frame of reference that allowed those foreign deities to be implemented into Roman tradition. So they use the noumen to kind of describe various divine archetypes, and therefore, like, you're worshiping Jupiter, but he has many localized names, and whether that's Baalbek in modern Lebanon, or Zeus in Greece. So, but they really struggled with how do they place the Abrahamic deity? Where does that deity reside, and what? But they were fascinated by him, and that's a tradition that goes back to Alexandria. Revising it as Yalda Boeth, the conception of Gnosticism. All of these things are kind of interrelated. So I created a noumen of the Logos, which is the namesake of the game. It's to reflect on the sudden introduction of Christianity into this imperial Roman context, and how beyond all odds it started to overcome and take over these different traditions. It's the funny. I was thinking about Easter last week. It's funny to me how in the Gospel of Mark, everybody's constantly being like, "Who are you?" to Jesus as he's like performing miracles and amazing things are happening, and they don't know. They're like, "Who are you?" They don't get it. And then at the end, like right at the end of the crucifixion, there's a Roman centurion who's a high-ranking soldier. Is like, this guy was the Son of God, right? The fact that Christianity was so popular amongst the Roman people was what led to it becoming the Roman Roman Catholicism. I find that to be incredibly interesting. So I have this noumen is the rarest noumen in the game, making its tricks exceedingly difficult to acquire and play. So I hope that's a introduction to what I'm calling nonfiction games. It's not business as usual, and it's not edutainment. It can be the way to structure and encode systemic bodies of knowledge. We know educators and creatives. We need educators and creatives to join together to create a new game format that serves game players and students, blurring the distinction in the process. So let's contextualize play itself as the universal teacher that it can be. Thanks very much. If you have any questions, I'll be standing by to discuss. If you're interested in backing the game, it's coming to Kickstarter soon. You can sign up for my mailing list by following the QR code. And yeah, I'm excited to talk with you all about this. So let's get into it.
Hello, can people see me? I think.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm Chelsea. I am part of the Hit Points in History team, and I'm here to help start this Q&A. First of all, thank you so much. This was super interesting to me as somebody who owns tarot cards. I was very interested to hear about all of the work that you're doing. But I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you all are not familiar with this, you can head up to where I am. If you click map view in the upper right hand corner of your screen, you'll see the map again, and then you can walk over to where I am. We have this sort of like glowy line where you can line up. But yeah, hopefully that's clear. All right, Lexi, I'm going to move out of your way because I think you have to be in this square. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I do think I have to be in the square. Colin, thanks so much for a great talk. One thing that stands out to me as someone who does both ancient and modern stuff is I don't remember which slide it was, but when you got to the Golden Dawn part, I thought it was really interesting because obviously, as you've shown, it kind of goes back a lot, more than I thought. But at the same time, as someone who also studies modern political science, I thought it was interesting because Golden Dawn is like a modern political party in Greece. I don't know if you know too much about that, but suffice to say that they are a party that really leans heavily into sort of nationalistic cultural heritage stuff. They are right-leaning. And it's just interesting to me how, you can have a lot of ancient concepts and ideas and names, and then they're recycled forward in this modern context. So, any connection there that you see between using, older names like this for a specific purpose. It's just really interesting to me.
I think there's always a concerted effort to form an even more ancient identity. So like Freemasonry, for instance, is, started as a trade union. And then by the 18th century, they're like, oh, actually, we were the guys that built the pyramids. And, that likely was not true. But it created this narrative that put them to the most ancient antecedent. And I think that's why so many different groups across the centuries have been interested in kind of forming that narrative. I think also it's like really interesting that before this moment in time of the Enlightenment, people didn't really identify themselves by like national concepts. They weren't like French or Italian. They were Catholic, or like in their own time, it would have just been like, oh, I'm a Christ follower. So there's always a ton of moments throughout history where people try to forecast how ancient they are, and honestly, my approach to that is like, here's how that is working and how we can like use it to our own advantage. And I found a lot of the kind of initial ideas about this from this author Erica Lagasse. I can't remember her name exactly, but she's an incredible scholar who wrote this book called The Occult Features of Anarchism, and it talks about how the various moments in history were kind of co-opted by conspiracies of peoples as well as conspiracies of kings. It's a very worthwhile read, and I unfortunately had to cut it out of the talk today.
Thanks, Colin. That was really interesting. One thing that all of this, continually brings up, and I feel like it's kind of following in the previous question, is this notion of syncretism, where you want to connect your specific understanding to, as you said, further and further back. But I wonder how the sort of cultural erasure that happens with that is interacting with how we perceive it now. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, or.
Can you speak a little bit more about exactly what.
So from my perspective as a classicist, when we talk about syncretic views, we're often talking about like the one-to-one alignment that the Greeks tried to see between like the Egyptian gods and their own, which by the way is not what we would pick normally. I think they put like Thoth and Hermes, and then the much easier but still kind of erasure version where the Romans were like, oh well, obviously Mercury is Hermes, and just so on a huge time scale where we're talking about Freemasons and Aleister Crowley and modern tarot readers, where we look for these symbols, we're like, oh yes, that's Zeus, right? That's Deus Pater. Like, how are we, like, we're using it to our advantage, like you said, and how are we dealing with the fact of what it sheds, what it erases?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of initially discovered how at first the Greeks in Ptolemaic Egypt were kind of co-opting their new subjects' religious practices and then interjecting their own traditions into it, and not just superseding it, but being more ancient than it. Like the Gigantomachy, stuff like that. So there's this phenomena that's happening all the time, where we're never going to experience this an ancient context. Like, we're never going to use games as a time machine. What we can do, though, is approach this systemic body of information in a way that doesn't fictionalize what is there. So, like, in the game, I use this Newman system to be like, here's one particular highly Googleable deity that you can thus go into. Like, the Pokédex is the world, if that makes sense.
Right. Oh, I can't figure out how to turn my camera. Thank you so much for that talk. That was awesome. I have an art background as opposed to a history and gaming background. So that made me curious about why you chose the art style you did for the game, and how if you wanted that to convey anything specific, you thought it was something cool, just the thought process behind that.
Yeah, in fact, I'm gonna share the artwork here. That might be a great way of approaching this. So these are for the second edition of the game. Let me just adjust this real quick. So the way I approached it is I needed to create like a system of correspondences which are portrayed visually. So I use color primarily to do that, and then I use the symbols as a secondary function of that. So that way I could use references to ancient artifacts in a way that isn't just pure invention. So let me, there's some example, there's a lot of, we just don't have visual records of certain deities that I wanted to highlight. But for a lot, I was able to find artifacts and representations that exemplify them in their own aesthetic without it being just like copy and pasted. So I painted these in Procreate, and based on my own photographs I went to like ancient ruins, I went to Masonic libraries, I went to museum collections to find some of these motifs. There's like Hadad, for instance, is represented with on these stela with like a bull's head, and this is like a a very like similar way of showing like this kind of motif, but you could see where it gets embedded into Judaism and the stories of Leviathan. Like some of the same imagery is recurrent between the two traditions. Some of them are taken from, like this one was taken from a piece of pottery. This one was like a lantern at the Masonic Temple in DC. But like the name Ammonite, like the fossil comes from the fact that the spiraling horn that we see on this Zeuslan figure. Neath, I found some artifacts at the Met that weren't representations of Neath, but was able to find other iconographic examples. She has the shield on her head, and especially in aniconic traditions, like how do I portray that? So I was able to kind of use apocalyptic literature and various poetic descriptions of deity and theophanies to create some of the artwork as well. And I'm going to jump ahead to another theophany that I find to be incredibly interesting from Apuleius. So the Golden Ass, I'm sure y'all know it, but in that text, there's this whole, through all of his misadventures in this like ancient version of Pinocchio, the donkey arrives at the beach and is like, I'm gonna pray to the moon to like either like turn me back into a human or just kill me. And it's this really beautiful passage, and ultimately like this, Isis emerges from the horizon and gives him this like very like Job-esque diatribe about who I am, and like I am all goddesses, and here's what you're going to do. Tomorrow you're going to walk into this town, you're going to eat a rose, you're going to turn back into a man, and then you can have your life, but you're going to have to worship me forever. So like it's a really like powerful passage, but like this is a very Roman idea of who Isis is. Like we don't have like the mystery cult version of Isis is markedly different than what she was before that. So, I was able to incorporate various imagery from these different versions. So you can see like a more classical Osiris and a Serapis figure to the left. And then the Harpocrates, which is the Horus the Child in the Greek rendition, Greek and Roman. And then, the donkey himself, is it Lucius? I forget his name. But anyway, so I depicted all of those things. I depicted a lot of, I went to the University of Chicago to find figures like this, which were like these very like motifs of of Ishtar that were very geometric kind of plaques made out of ceramics. So I used that as the basis and then painted on top of it. So it's kind of a sculptural additive process. I hope that answers your question. I could go on forever about it. Would y'all like me to just like flip through some more artwork?
Yeah, I'd be down for that. I know there's another question behind me and we're getting close to the end of time.
Okay.
But I'm excited to order these cards because I love the artwork. I think it's awesome.
Thank you.
You did it, and I'm pumped to just flip through them. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay, hi. I hope you can hear me.
Hi, yes.
Perfect. I'm sorry for not having my camera on, but my laptop's kind of dying here. So, yeah. Beside other things, I'm a teacher, and we've got a format playing board games and card games with our students that are either themed around antiquity or are based on classic games. However, especially with card games, we've got the problem that although we talk about the background of the cards, it soon is just focusing on the game itself. So we lose the connection to the topic or the history or the themes that are actually the background of the game. Do you have any ideas or experience or maybe some kind of anchor points within that game that keep you talking or coming back to the things that are actually depicted on the cards?
Yeah, I found that one easy way for players to kind of experience the cards initially is to just play Go Fish with it. It's the simplest game, and you can be like, do you have a card that depicts this thing? You know, have you ever seen John Berger's Ways of Seeing? It was a BBC documentary, and there's this beautiful moment where he asks a bunch of adults like what this painting means, and it's like a Caravaggio painting of the Doubting of Thomas or something, and in it the adults are like, it seems like it's Jesus. But then when he asks a group of kids, they are like very engaged with the ambiguity of the work and are like, I think it's a man. I think it's a woman. I think that they're like, that guy wants to kiss him or something. Like it's, children have a kind of unlearned perspective on what art is. And so I think they don't need to know the context to be able to like, is there a bull on the card? Do you have a card that has a bull? I think that's a great way for students to kind of approach the subject. And, on top of that, I want you to be able to play solitaire. I want you to be able to play. So I have a rule book of games that use specific rule sets that kind of use the uniqueness of this deck to better effect. Does that answer your question fully, or can I elaborate further?
No, it's okay. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Well, thank you, Colin. I'm going to close us out so we can have a minute or two before we hop into Julie's presentation. This was fantastic. If you want to find out more about Colin, Logos Divine, or Little Red, go up to the little desks up top. There are links. Check out his Kickstarter. I've already signed up, so I'm, like I said, super pumped for this.